have Andreas Hildebrand from ALC Networks. He's going to be talking about MADI over IP with Ravenna and the magic about flow configuration and packet setup. Over to you, Andreas.
So Max, thank you for showing up. All right, yeah, so I hope someone from Audinet is also stopping by, but well, apparently not. Okay, so here we go. This is a presentation from the Ravenna side of things, but it's basically applying to everything audio over IP, so AES23 MOIP MADI, Dante and so on, and it's about the magic of flow configuration and packet setup, and I just titled the whole presentation MADI over IP with Ravenna because up till now it's the only technology which actually allows you to transport MADI-like signals or MADI signals with the MADI-like performance over IP with the configuration options you actually have within Ravenna. So I'm skipping the introduction slide because by now everyone knows me, I hope so at least. And let's have a quick look as an entry into the topic about the technology layers. We have seen that several times. These are the typical functional block. Any audio over IP a solution is consisting of. For the Ravenna side of things, we have the standard ingredients with quite a huge flexibility in terms of parameterizing or configuring stuff. So, for example, sample rates are supported all the way from 44.1 up to 384 kilohertz in some applications. Transport is the standard protocols, RTP over UDP and IP. Differentiated services is a standard mechanism for quality of service. We have a wide range of codecs, and I'm going to explain what codecs are actually in the context of AoIP solutions. SDP is the standard means of transporting information from the sender to the receiver. And then we have, of course, means in place which are beyond AES23 and 2110 for connection management and discovery of available streams and resources on the network, which is based on the DNS SD scheme. Now there's an open space there. For those of you who have carefully watched, and that open space is the core topic I'm talking about today, that is packet setup. And the packet setup in Ravenna is very, very flexible, and together with the encoding, we have a lot of possible options on how to transport signals relating to the particular application requirements, all the way up to a MADI over IP, a MADI-like performance and operation over IP. So, the user perspective. How does the user traditionally see the distribution of audio signals? Well, it's the matrix or the cross-point matrix type of approach. So we have on one side we have all the source signals. I think it's in this example it's on the upper side, and we have on the left side the possible receiving points, and it's actually the user is, setting check marks where he wants to have signals being connected. Now, that is quite okay if you have a small installation with a ample number of devices, but as soon as it gets into larger applications, that can really get nasty because you have hundreds, if not thousands, of input and output signals, and well, there must be other means and options to approach this topic. However, this cross-point matrix type operation is what we call circuit switching. We are switching an input circuit to an output destination. So we are establishing a circuit at the end, virtually at least. And circuit switching in physical is something like this. You all know this, or maybe you don't know that anymore, but you might have heard about this. This is a telephone system in the early days, but we are all working with packet networks now. So packet networks do not have, well, they still have cables, of course, but you're not connecting an input to an output with the network cables. You are distributing packets across the network, and packet distribution is that. You have lots of packets, they have addresses on them, they have different sizes, they have, there's some spacing between packets, sometimes packets have to wait for other packets to go down a particular line, and they can contain whatever content you like. So from the outside you can't actually judge what is in the packet. You have priority stuff with packets, UPS, next day delivery and these kind of things. All this is also available on networks. So what is a packet then from the network perspective? A packet is a small segment of a larger message or data flow. This is what applies to us here. Audio signals are data flows. So, and they are segmented into smaller packets. That's what the transmitter or the transmitting device is already doing. It's dividing packets into, well, it's audio streams into smaller packets. And then the receiver has the task to reassemble the original input signal from the incoming packets. So it has to unpack the packets and generate the input signal. Packets are usually defined by their protocol. So we have RTP packets, we have UDP packets, we have Ethernet packets, whatsoever. So packets are usually defined by their protocol. And any packet whatsoever, regardless on which protocol it works, always has a header section and a payload section, specific to the particular transport protocol. So, in order to understand this a bit better, we'll have a very, very quick look into the OSI model. The OSI model is a model which describes network-based communication between any two devices. So it's a 7-layer model. I'm not going to explain the individual layers, you will see in a second anyway. And the receiver, of course, has the same approach. And now we have on the application layer, we have an audio data stream which we want to send over from the sender to the transmitter to the receiver, sorry. And we know by now we can't just send a continuous stream of data, we have to packetize it. So we split the audio stream into several chunks or blocks. Now, in order to actually transport these chunks of data, we have to utilize this network model. So that means we have to wrap the audio data into a suitable transport or session layer protocol. In this case is the RTP, the real-time transport protocol. So we use the RTP protocol to transport audio data in an IP-based environment. However, that still can't just go over the wire. We need another protocol on the transport layer. So we use UDP to wrap the whole RTP packet. You can just consider this as a second wrapping, right, around the packet. And it goes on, further down, the IP layer is needed, then we need the data link layer, and most of the time that is Ethernet, of course. And then finally, once we leave the Ethernet layer, we are down to zeros and ones, and the physical layer actually takes care of the transport, but the physical layer doesn't even have any clue what it is actually transporting. It's just making sure that the binary information which was handed down from the Ethernet layer is transported across, so that on the receiver side we can reassemble the Ethernet packet and unwrap all the other protocols, where we end up with the data chunk on the application layer. That's how the OSI model works. You have probably recognized that I have grayed out the presentation layer. Not all communications actually need always all layers, so that's why I just gave the audio transport as an example here. So we have the RTP, the real-time transport protocol. It's format agnostic. It consists of an RTP header, and the RTP header is generic, of course, and then it has an RTP payload section, and the RTP packet, the protocol, doesn't care what's in the payload area. That's where we store the audio data. Okay, let's look into the audio data. What are encoding parameters for audio? Well, first of all, sampling rate. Let's assume 48 kilohertz, but it could be 96 kilohertz or anything else. That's one of the encoding parameters. Another parameter is with linear audio, and we are only talking linear audio in this context, right? The PCM bit width. That can be 16 or 24 bits or even 32 bits whatsoever. So 24 bits is quite common. Also 16-bit is considered professional. So you have 2 or 3 bytes basically of audio payload. And any sample input signal is a stream of samples, right? And any sample has, in this example with L24, has 3 bytes. So we have a stream of audio bytes. Byte 1, 2, 3 of the first sample, byte 1, 2, 3 of the second sample, and so on. So that's what we want to transport across. So, well, hey, let's take our RTP packet and store the data bytes, the individual sample data bytes into a packet, right? Can we do this? Yeah, of course we can do this, because the RTP protocol actually doesn't care. So what does that mean, actually? That means if we are looking on this wrapping, this OC layer model, from the wrapping perspective, we have that Ethernet. Ethernet has a header and trailer actually, and a payload area. It doesn't care what's in the payload area. Inside the Ethernet payload area, there's the IP packet. That's the next layer. We have IP packet header and IP payload area. Inside the IP payload, there's the UDP header and the UDP payload area. And UDP doesn't care what's in there, so we have the RTP protocol, which is traveling inside an UDP packet, which has the header, and now finally the audio payload area. So we put the 3 bytes of audio payload into the RTP payload area, and now we have a weird situation, because we have 3 bytes of net payload, but as you can see above, we have accumulated 61 or 65 if we use Ethernet VLAN tagging. Let's stay with the 61 for now. 61 bytes of overhead. So the net bandwidth efficiency goes down to 5%, right? Of any given bandwidth, we are only utilizing 5% because of this protocol wrapping. So it's not a good idea to just transport any sample individually, because the network utilization is really, really bad. And also it resembles into 48,000 packets per individual sample signals on a network, because we are sending individual samples across. So that's not very, very useful. To summarize, any RTP packet adds 12 bytes of overhead, and the whole wrapping, when it comes down to an Ethernet, before it comes down to an Ethernet frame, adds another 28 bytes. So we always have a fixed overhead of 40 bytes with any IP-based transfer, given that it's utilizing the RTP protocol. So, how can we improve the situation? Well, what about not storing individual samples, but a number of samples inside the payload area? Let's assume we are storing 48 samples in the payload areas. That adds up to 144 bytes. Why 48? Well, because at 48 kilohertz, this is 1 millisecond of audio data. So we'll do that. Is that a good idea? Let's look at the math. The math says, okay, if we are storing 48 samples into the RTP payload area, we have a very good bandwidth utilization. It's 71% net bandwidth efficiency, and we have significantly dialed down, sorry, we have significantly, where's the page back? Page up, and minus, here we go, page up. And we have dialed down the packet rate from 48,000 to 1,000, so much more capable. So can't we just, increase it even more, make more out of the available bandwidth? Let's just store not 48 samples in the packet. Let's go all the way up to 500 samples into one packet. Why not? Hey, let's utilize the bandwidth, maximize the bandwidth utilization we have. So we are throwing 500 samples into the packet. Well, let's do the math. Then we have 1,500 bytes in the RTP payload section. It comes up to 96% net bandwidth efficiency, and only just below 100 packets per second. Isn't that nice for the network? Wonderful, but look at this number. That number now calculates to 1,558. Well, and that is something which is not allowed with an Ethernet packet, because the Ethernet packet has a maximum payload capacity, which is called a maximum transmission unit, and that is 1,500 byte Ethernet payload section. So what would a network do if the Ethernet frame is larger? Has anyone a clue? Would it explode? Oh, it would separate the packets on any higher layer protocol. It's the IP protocol. It would separate that into 2 different IP packets. We call this segmentation. And segmentation, for several reasons I don't want to go into detail, is a really bad thing. So we need to make sure that our maximum packet size stays at the 1,500 MTU unit. So here's the summary again. We have 1,500 bytes in the Ethernet, and that dials down to 1,460 bytes RTP or audio payload, net payload. That's an important number to remember. Okay, so then if we look at a pre-calculated table here, I don't know if I have the, can I see this here? Yes. So we have the 48 samples, which is the 1 millisecond packet time. We have 1,000 packets, are quite good bandwidth efficiency, and we have a calculated megabit per stream, so bandwidth per stream, which is required. And you can see, of course, the more data we store into a packet, the better the network efficiency is. So why not try to store the maximum data we can get into a packet for a good bandwidth utilization? Well, and even in 96 kilohertz, don't go into details here, that also has the same characteristics, just with different numbers. But there is the value of the packet time. Packet time means the more data I stuff into a packet, the longer I have to wait on the transmitting side before I can send off that packet. And that directly translates into the minimum, the absolute minimum latency any given signal is experiencing on a network. So if I have to wait for 1 millisecond before I can throw off the packet on the sender side, I already have 1 millisecond of latency generated. And then of course the network jitter and hops and everything goes along with it. So how could I then increase the network efficiency without sacrificing the latency? Well, very simple. I just add the number of channels into the packet. So 1 channel per stream does mean I have relatively small packets which I'm transmitting at any given packet time. If I increase this to 2, I get a better efficiency because I'm now having 2 samples per packet in it, so it's a 50% improvement. And so on. I can use 8 channels per stream, but I can also use 64 channels per stream. Does it ring a bell? 64 channels? MADI, here we are, here we go. So why not throw 64 channels in if I have to transfer 64 channels? But why not just throw 23 channels in if I have a stage box which has 23 source signals, right? So that is the idea of adjusting the number of channels into any given flow or packet. So the application for this quite easy example. Let's assume we have a 5.1 surround system, we have a sender, and it needs to transport a 6-channel surround audio signal to the individual speakers. Physically, there's a network switch, the speakers and all the sender devices are individually connected to the network ports, right? And now, one option would be to transport 6 individual unicast streams with the individual channels and addressing the speakers so that the speakers just receive their individual signal. That's an option, clearly, right? But, well, as we know now, it's not very efficient because we have 6 times the old packet overhead and everything there. So the second option would be, why not transport a single channel with all 6 audio, a single stream with all 6 channels in it with multicast. Difference between unicast and multicast, I think it's clear, doesn't change anything to the math and the stuff I'm talking about. So it doesn't matter if you use unicast or multicast. That's more a matter of what operation mode is basically preferred. So, but we have a 6-channel there, and that stream, that single stream, gets distributed to all the speakers. So now the question, of course, is how does a speaker know what channel out of those 6 to pick? Well, that's another problem coming up in a second. But looking at the pure numbers behind that, if we would transport 6 single-channel streams, we have a total bandwidth, and that's basically for 8 and not for 6, so forgive that calculation difference. I did the math for 8 individual streams. We have roughly 14.5 megabit per second, which is required for those 8 channels, just with 8 streams, just with 1 channel inside. So if we take the other route and just create 1 stream with 8 channels in it, we have a total of 8.8. So it's a significant reduction of bandwidth or increase in bandwidth efficiency. Transporting the same signal with the same packet time, with the same latency. Right, but of course now the question is, how does the speaker know which channel actually to listen to? And here, in contrast to the picture we have seen at the beginning with the crosspoint matrix, the perspective now is I want to create a 6-channel stream, one thing. So we are stream-centric now. We are looking at what is the stream I'm going to use first. So a 6-channel stream. Now what input channels do I put into the stream? That's where a matrix comes into game, but this matrix is related to the sender solely. It's not the overall whole system. I'm looking at the sender and say, okay, one of these input channels can be quite a huge matrix anyway. You know, just look at direct out or merging devices or Lavo devices, which have a huge number of input channels, but it's only the sender side. So I create a 6-channel stream by telling the setup procedure what channels I want to put in the stream, and then it's very same on the receiving side. The receiver is now subscribing to one stream. It says there are multi-channel, surround, signal, blah, blah, blah. So it's subscribing to that particular stream, and then it only has to deal with 6 available channel signals, right? And not with hundreds of other sources he's not interested in, that single speaker. And that single speaker only has to set one cross point, apparently, to receive the one channel out of the 6 being in the multicast stream. So we still have sort of a matrix approach, but device specific and not for the overall system here. Next table is just a few more numbers to give you the ideas how we increase actually the bandwidth efficiency if we dial down the packet time, typically packet times to achieve lower latencies. You can always see the comparison between the green number and the orange or red number above. If we go down to just one sample in the packet, that's even more apparent what the saving is to have one sample but 8 channel stream compared to 8 single channel streams at one sample time. So that's eating up more than 1/4 of your gigabit bandwidth to distribute the 6 channels individually at a very small latency here. So, and then we could stuff 64 channels into a packet, always obeying the MTU, the maximum number of bytes we are allowed to stuff into a packet, right? But here are 2 typical setups for a 64 channel stream, and that is MADI over IP. And now you can see we can do it in a 1 sample configuration. That is not too bad of a bandwidth efficiency, but it's creating 48,000 packets on a network, and it uses 100 megabit. But we have only 1 sample packet time, so it's a very, very fast connection. And that is exactly what can cope or match the typical performance of a point-to-point MADI connection. So typically MADI implementation would need about 4 samples, 4 or 5 samples, I would say, from sender to receiver with all this alignment and blah blah blah. And we can pretty much match that or even supersede this with just 1 sample per packet, but stuffing 64 channels in it. Well, if we can go a bit more relaxed, if we want to go more relaxed, we can add up to 6 channels before we reach the maximum allowed payload size. And that gives an even better payload or network utilization, as you can see on the number. So that's MADI over IP if you have the means to configure your streams accordingly, if you have the means at hand, right? And you'll see that that's not always the case. Because it's all simple math at the end, but it's complex things with how many bytes here, how many bits there, what's the interframe gap, blah, blah, blah. And so we have configured these Excel tables where you just enter how many bytes, how many channels, what packet time I want, and then it gives you the number, how many channels you can accommodate, what the bandwidth is, and so on, just as a tool. Should be available on the Ravenna network page. So looking at different typical audio over IP solutions, what are the choices of flow configuration? That's how I call it. What parameters can I set up for creating my streams? Ravenna allows you to choose between PCM or AES3 audio. I hope that everyone here on the AES floor knows what AES3 audio is. It's not just linear PCM data. So it's L16, L24 or the AM824. And we have even enhancements by manufacturers using DXD, DSD at 384 kilohertz. Merging is doing this with the same Ravenna principles. The number of channels per flow is completely flexible, as we have just seen here. There's a asterisk at the end of the N, and that asterisk just comes down to you need to obey the maximum transfer unit or the maximum payload size in combination with the packet time, because the packet time determines how many samples you will put per channel into a packet. So the N and M is something where you need to obey the maximum payload constraint of 1,460 bytes. So the combination of both does not allow to exceed 1,460 bytes, but otherwise you're completely free in terms of how many channels per flow, 1, 3, 7, 24, 64, even more than 64, and the packet time you want to use in order to match whatever latency you want to reach. And of course, the sample rate is something which is given by device usually, and it depends on device implementation, but the sample rate also is a choice of flow configuration. And as I said, with Ravenna as a standard, we have 44.1 up to 192 kilohertz, but manufacturers are free to implement whatever they like, 32 kilohertz, 384 kilohertz, complete freedom here. AES67. Well, AES67 has a very constrained set of choices for the flow setup on purpose, because it's an interoperability profile, basically, targeting at being supported by all the existing applications. So we have a very constrained set, linear encoding with 16 and 24-bit. Number of channels per flow has to stay between 1 and 8. Actually, it's 0 to 8, but there's no real application for a 0 channel flow, but that's what technically has to be supported. Packet time, there's only one mandatory packet time. That's 48 samples at 48 kilohertz is 1 millisecond. AES67 has recommendations. If implementers want to use shorter or longer packet times, they recommend to use those in brackets, but mandatory is only 1 millisecond. Sample rate, again, mandatory is only 48 kilohertz. It says, well, you can implement 44.1 or 96, but it's not mandatory. So if a sender supports 96 kilohertz, it might well be that the receiver cannot deal with it because it's just built along the limited constraints of the AES67 standard. SMPTE 2110-30, another standard for audio transport. Basically, that fully comes down to AES67. That's why the parameters are very similar. However, you see that there is an option 1 to 8 and 1 to 64 channels per flow. That comes down to what I will bring up just in a second, conformance levels they have described, or profiles, they call it conformance levels. Packet time usually is the 1 millisecond as the only mandatory thing to support, but they also define 125 microsecond, that is 6 samples per packet, through the conformance levels. And sample rate, again, 48 is the only mandatory sample rate, but they also give recommendations for 96 kilohertz. And here's the conformance levels. They have A, B, C, and out of these different conformance levels, which differ in the number of channels or the packet time and implementation has to support, if it is compliant with any of those conformance levels. The only mandatory requirement inside -30 is actually what is supported by AES67. So any AES67 device is automatically compliant with the mandatory requirements of -30. So then next, -31. We were talking about linear PCM. What is -31 bringing to the table? AES3 audio. So it needs the SMPTE to actually define an IP-based transport of for AES3 audio. AES67 is not dealing with AES3, right? Interestingly enough, but yeah, that's the way. And shortening this up, we have the same math, the same conformance levels, just with different numbers, because now we have 4 bytes of payload data instead of 3 bytes. So we needed to adjust, the number of channels which fit into any given packet. And interestingly enough, Ravenna had AES3 from the very beginning, so anything which is in -31 is already covered by Ravenna. So no worries, if you have Ravenna, you're fully 2110 compliant in any direction. Okay, finally, there's another popular one, which is Dante. Coming back to the initial example, Dante has some configuration choices, but they are limited, as the flows, the principle of flows or streams, is generally hidden by design. Right? Remember the user interface of the Dante controller. We had input signals and output signals. We could set cross points. We weren't able to tell anything about stream configuration because that is being done automatically for ease of use, but that gives you, of course, some constraints when it comes to flexibility and configuration for your particular needs. So Dante is supporting linear PCM encoding, 24, 16, 32 bits. The number of channel per flows with unicast is default 4, so whenever you set a cross point, it's automatically generating a stream with 4 channels in it, even if it's just using 1 channel, but that's the case. And as soon as you have the 5th channel originating from a given device to a given receiver, it creates another stream with 4 channels in it again. And only for multicast you have a choice for creating multicast streams with 1 to 8 channels. If you have a 9th channel, you have to create a second stream. And with the addition of the Dante Domain Manager, they now allow the creation of multicast streams with up to 64 channels, because that is required by a -30 conformance level C. So in 2110 mode, they're supporting a relatively flexible creation of multicast channel as well. And the packet time is also something which you do not immediately have access to. It's automatically decided for you if once you set the desired latency on the receiving side. So you can set the latency for a receiver, and that applies to all streams coming into that receiver. And then depending on the latency, it's automatically choosing the packet time for you. And so from my research, I might be wrong, the default latency is 1 millisecond, and that translates into a 16 sample per packet packet time. So they're throwing in 16 samples per packet. And sample rate wise, Dante can support all the way up to 96 as a standard, but I've also seen 192 kilohertz implementations with Dante. So, if Ravenna is so flexible, how are we taming the beast? Right? Because we want to make it a bit easier for users as well. We have the concept of profiles with Ravenna. So we have a generic profile. All Ravenna devices must support this generic profile. And it happens to be very similar to the AES23 mandatory requirements. Then we have a high performance profile and an ultra high performance profile. You can imagine ultra high means, okay, you need to support MADI over IP with 1 sample packet time. And that requires some very decent implementations, right? So then we have DSD DXD profile. We have a LiveWire legacy profile, so we can interoperate with LiveWire legacy devices. And yeah, AES10, which is MADI, is living between these two profiles, either in the ultra high performance or high performance area. AES67 basically is identical to the generic profile, and SMPTE 2110, depending on the conformance level, is either the high performance or the generic profile. So that's why we created this Ravenna slogan, AES67 and 2110 built in, and it's either the generic or the high performance profile, which cover all the requirements of 2110. That's basically it. Well, 2 minutes overtime as always. So we skipped the question section. I'll be around, so if you have any questions, just feel free to stop by and let's discuss some stuff. And more information, as always, is on the very extensive Ravenna resources webpage. You find lots of documents on how AoIP systems, not just Ravenna, work,